In the public eye, Adrian and Lila appeared to be the embodiment of perfection, the couple everyone admired, envied, and secretly wanted to become. They attended charity galas, smiled for magazine covers, and were often labeled as the power pair of the decade. Adrian was the young CEO whose brilliance had turned a struggling company into an empire of influence, while Lila, with her effortless beauty and grace, was the heart of every room she entered. Together they looked unstoppable. Yet behind the polished smiles and carefully chosen words, cracks had begun to form, cracks no one could see beneath the glamour. Adrian's affection had slowly turned into arrogance, his love into possession. What once felt like partnership now felt like performance. Lila, once confident and independent, found herself fading into his shadow, forced to play the part of the perfect wife in a story she no longer recognized. Tonight's luxury charity dinner was meant to celebrate their success and status, another event where Adrian could parade his accomplishments before the city's elite. But deep inside, Lila sensed something different. The uneasy silence between them, the tension behind his compliments, it all pointed to one truth. This night would not end the way anyone expected. The ballroom shimmered beneath the glow of golden chandeliers, each crystal reflecting the grandeur of the night. Laughter and music blended into an elegant hum as waiters in black and white uniforms floated gracefully between tables, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was the Stars of Fortune Gala, the most anticipated event of the year, where the city's richest and most powerful gathered to flaunt their success and whisper about others. Every corner sparkled, from the diamond necklaces to the smiles that hid quiet rivalries. Lila entered the room beside Adrian, her silver gown gliding like liquid light across the marble floor. She looked flawless, every detail carefully chosen, yet her heart felt heavy beneath the glittering facade. As flashes from photographers danced around them, Adrian leaned in close, his voice smooth but cutting. "Try not to embarrass me tonight," he murmured through his perfect, practiced smile. The words stung like a slap, and she forced a polite laugh to mask her pain. Throughout the evening, guests complimented her beauty and grace, calling her an inspiration, a vision, the perfect wife. But Adrian's gaze carried only quiet disdain. He cracked loud jokes, interrupted conversations, and boasted about his business deals, ensuring every eye was on him. To him, Lila wasn't a partner. She was a reflection of his success. And as she smiled for the crowd, she couldn't help but wonder when she had stopped feeling seen and started feeling invisible. As the night wore on, the glamour of the gala began to blur into a cruel performance. Every conversation at their table became another opportunity for Adrian to showcase his charm, and quietly diminish his wife. When Lila spoke softly about her charity foundation for orphan children, her voice carrying warmth and sincerity, Adrian leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Oh, Lila loves to take credit for that," he said lightly. "But let's be honest, she just writes the checks, she doesn't really get her hands dirty." His friends laughed, assuming it was harmless teasing, but the laughter sliced through her like glass. She forced a smile, even as her fingers tightened around her napkin to keep from shaking. Later, a well-known journalist complimented Lila on her powerful speech from a recent women's empowerment event. Before she could even respond, Adrian smirked and said, "That speech, I helped her write half of it. I had to make sure it sounded professional." His tone was playful, but the underlying condescension was clear. Lila's lips pressed together in humiliation as murmurs and chuckles followed. The more he spoke, the smaller she felt, as if he were stripping her of her identity piece by piece, right in front of everyone. When she could no longer bear the weight of his mockery, she quietly excused herself, her heels echoing against the marble as she disappeared into the restroom. Locking the door, she stared into the mirror at a face she barely recognized. Eyes red, smile trembling. "Why do I let him do this to me?" she whispered. The woman staring back wasn't the confident dreamer she once was, but a stranger molded by humiliation and love that had long since turned toxic. What Adrian didn't know, what no one at that glittering table knew, was that Lila's mother, Eleanor Vale, had arrived unannounced. The formidable business magnate, often called the Iron Rose in financial circles, was a woman whose name commanded respect in every boardroom and whose fortune had shaped industries. Dressed elegantly but understatedly, she had chosen a discreet corner seat at the far end of the ballroom, blending into the background while her sharp eyes missed nothing. Eleanor wasn't one for grand entrances or gossip. She preferred quiet observation. But tonight she wasn't just attending as a guest. She was a mother on a silent mission. Eleanor had heard the whispers for months. Rumors of Adrian's growing arrogance, the way he belittled Lila behind closed doors, the performative affection that masked his pride. She had hoped they were exaggerated, believing that love might humble him. Yet as she watched her daughter's forced smile and trembling hands, the truth unfolded before her like a cruel play. Every mocking comment from Adrian ignited a storm behind her calm, composed facade. Her heart broke for her daughter, the girl she had raised to be strong, compassionate, and proud, now sitting beside a man who mistook cruelty for confidence. But beneath that heartbreak burned fury. Eleanor Vale was not a woman who watched silently while someone disrespected her family. She had given Adrian his chances, all of them. Tonight, his final one would end. And when it did, no one in that ballroom would ever forget it. As the waiters cleared the main course and brought in a decadent dessert, golden soufflés dusted with sugar and paired with vintage wine, Adrian rose to his feet, his glass raised high. "A toast," he announced. His smile broad and charming enough to fool anyone who didn't know him. Conversations quieted as dozens of faces turned toward him, glasses poised, eyes glinting with curiosity. Lila looked up from her plate, already sensing the familiar dread curling in her chest. "To my wife," he began grandly, placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. "The most beautiful woman in the room, even if she can't tell the difference between a Bordeaux and a Merlot." The room erupted in polite laughter, but the tone was cruel, and Lila's breath caught in her throat. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she forced a tiny, brittle smile. Surely he was finished. But he wasn't. "She means well," Adrian went on, swirling his wine dramatically, "but she's still learning how to act in high society. We're working on that." His friends chuckled, some awkwardly, others eagerly. The kind of laughter that feeds the powerful and silences the kind. Lila's hands trembled in her lap. She tried to laugh along, tried to be graceful, but humiliation wrapped around her like ice. Across the room, Eleanor's calm demeanor faltered for the first time. Her elegant fingers tightened around her wine glass until her knuckles turned white. The faintest tremor passed through her lips. Fury, heartbreak, and resolve all blending into one cold decision. Lila blinked back tears, whispering softly, "Please stop," but Adrian only leaned closer and murmured, "Don't cry. You'll ruin your makeup, and my reputation." That single sentence broke something inside her, and inside Eleanor too. The billionaire matriarch rose from her seat, her presence commanding instant silence. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The host froze. Everyone recognized her. Eleanor Vale, the woman whose words could shake markets and crush egos. And when she began to walk toward the stage, even Adrian's confident smile began to fade. Eleanor's heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way toward the stage, her posture regal, her expression composed but unreadable. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers spreading like wildfire. Adrian froze mid-smile, confusion flickering in his eyes as the realization set in. The host stepped forward awkwardly, his voice trembling. "Mrs. Vale," he stammered, "we didn't know you were attending." "I wasn't planning to," Eleanor replied smoothly, her tone calm but carrying an undercurrent of authority that commanded silence. Taking the microphone with measured grace, she looked around the room, every eye fixed on her. Then, with quiet, deliberate clarity, she said, "But I couldn't resist witnessing how my daughter was being treated." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Laughter died instantly. Forks stopped clinking. Lila's breath caught, her heart pounding as the entire ballroom turned to watch her mother. Adrian's confident grin faltered, replaced by a flash of fear. Eleanor's voice remained calm, But her words struck like lightning. You see, when a man marries a woman, he promises to love and honor her. But some men confuse partnership with possession. Tonight, Adrian taught us all how arrogance looks when it dresses in a tuxedo. The crowd gasped. Adrian forced a weak laugh, his voice cracking as he tried to recover control. Ma'am, with all due respect. Respect. Eleanor cut him off, her tone sharp as glass. That's something you give, not something you demand. You've humiliated the woman who believed in you, stood by you, and carried your name with dignity. You built your empire on her grace, and tonight, you repay her with cruelty and mockery. That's not power, Adrian. That's cowardice in a designer suit. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Adrian's face drained of color, his confidence shattered. Lila sat motionless, tears glistening in her eyes, not from embarrassment but from awe. For the first time in years, someone had stood up for her. Eleanor's tone softened as she turned toward her daughter, handing the microphone back to the host. Lila, sweetheart, she said gently, you don't have to stay with a man who forgets your worth. Silence filled the room before a wave of whispers broke out. Lila's tears finally fell, but this time they weren't from shame. They were tears of release, of strength rediscovered, and of a chapter that had just ended with her mother's courage echoing through every corner of that glittering room. The next morning, the world woke up to chaos, and Adrian's name was everywhere. Every major news outlet flashed the same bold headline across their screens. Billionaire Eleanor Vale confronts son-in-law at charity gala. Within hours, clips of Eleanor's calm yet devastating speech had gone viral, circulating on every platform imaginable. Millions watched as she exposed Adrian's arrogance with poise and precision, her words echoing like justice long overdue. Comment sections overflowed with admiration for Eleanor and sympathy for Lila. What had begun as a glamorous dinner ended as one of the most talked-about public humiliations of the year. Adrian's phone buzzed non-stop, reporters, investors, publicists, all demanding explanations. He tried to spin the narrative, but his once golden charm had lost its power. No one believed his polished excuses. His company's shares began to nosedive before noon as confidence in his leadership evaporated. Board members called emergency meetings, whispering about damage control and potential resignation. Brands he had partnered with quickly issued statements distancing themselves from him, citing ethical concerns. Clients withdrew deals. His empire, the one he had built on ego and control, began to crumble in real time. Meanwhile, Eleanor's name trended globally. Her impromptu speech hailed as a masterclass in public dignity and maternal courage. Editorials praised her for standing up for decency, for setting an example of grace under fire. Lila, too, became an unexpected symbol, the quiet woman who had endured humiliation and finally seen the scales of justice tip in her favor. Photos of her tearful but composed face at the gala circulated widely, tagged with phrases like strength, resilience, and the woman who stood tall. By nightfall, Adrian's world had collapsed. The luxury dinner he'd intended to flaunt his power became the night he lost it all: reputation, respect, and the woman who once made him human. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet, as if the universe itself had paused to let Lila breathe. She retreated to her mother's coastal estate, far from the noise of gossip columns and flashing cameras. There, the ocean stretched endlessly before her, its waves whispering a kind of freedom she hadn't felt in years. The air smelled of salt and possibility. For the first time in a long while, Lila had space, to think, to feel, to remember who she once was before her marriage had dimmed her light. She spent her mornings walking barefoot along the shore, collecting shells like she used to as a girl. In the afternoons, she painted again. Soft skies, endless water, faces of women who looked both broken and strong. Each stroke of color felt like reclaiming a lost piece of herself. At night, she wrote in her old journal, words flowing like waves. I was never the problem. I just loved the wrong man too deeply. One golden evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Eleanor joined her on the terrace, 2 cups of tea steaming between them. You can forgive him if you choose, Eleanor said quietly. But don't forget who you are. Lila turned to her, a small, bittersweet smile forming. I'm done being small, she whispered. With her mother's guidance and wisdom, she founded Grace Within, an organization dedicated to helping women trapped in toxic relationships rediscover their self-worth. What began as a personal act of healing soon became a global movement. Her story, of humiliation turned into empowerment, inspired thousands to find courage in their own pain. Meanwhile, Adrian's once mighty empire continued to crumble. In desperation, he sent Lila a handwritten letter that read, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how much I needed you until I lost you." She read it once, folded it neatly, and set it aside without a tear or a reply. For the first time in years, she didn't need closure. She already had it, in the rhythm of the waves and the strength of her own heart. Exactly 1 year later, the grand ballroom once again glowed under the same chandeliers that had witnessed the most unforgettable confrontation of the decade. The Stars of Fortune Gala had returned, but this time the air was charged with a different kind of anticipation. Reporters and guests whispered in hushed tones, eyes darting toward the entrance. Would Lila Vale make an appearance? Would the formidable Eleanor take the stage again? The curiosity was palpable. The memory of that explosive night still lingered like perfume in the air. And then, as the orchestra began to play, the whispers stopped. Lila entered, alone, poised and radiant. Her gown shimmered like moonlight, but it was her calm confidence that truly drew every gaze. She no longer looked like a woman defined by someone else's name. She carried herself like someone who had rebuilt her own world from the ashes. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and one reporter called out, "Mrs. Vale, any thoughts on your ex-husband?" Lila paused gracefully, her smile serene. "He taught me what love should never feel like," she replied simply. Later in the evening, the host invited her to say a few words. Lila took the microphone, the same object that had once delivered her public humiliation, now a symbol of her power. "Last year," she began softly, "I was humiliated in this very room. This year I stand proud, not because I'm perfect, but because I finally remembered my worth." For a heartbeat there was silence, then a thunder of applause. Among the crowd, many women wiped their eyes, their hearts echoing her truth. In that moment, Lila wasn't just a guest at the gala. She was its soul, a living reminder that even the most broken voices can rise to be heard again. Eleanor sat near the back of the ballroom, watching her daughter with a warmth that no amount of wealth or power could ever buy. The soft golden light shimmered around Lila as she stood on stage, radiant in confidence and peace. For Eleanor it was more than pride, it was witnessing a rebirth. The world had seen the power of a mother's love and the strength of a daughter who refused to stay broken. What had once been a night of humiliation had transformed into a legacy, a story of courage, grace, and transformation that would be remembered long after the music faded. As the final applause echoed, Lila turned her gaze toward her mother. Their eyes met across the crowd, a silent exchange of love, gratitude, and victory. Her lips trembled with emotion as she whispered, "Thank you for saving me when I couldn't save myself." Eleanor rose from her seat, her smile gentle but proud. "No, darling," she replied softly, her voice carrying just enough to reach her daughter. "You saved yourself, I just held the mic." The audience erupted into a standing ovation, cameras flashing like a field of stars. But for Lila and Eleanor, the world around them faded away. This wasn't just applause for a speech. It was a celebration of survival, of rediscovered worth. And as the night came to an end, one truth shone brighter than any spotlight. In a world obsessed with wealth and power, compassion, real, fearless compassion, still held the loudest, most unforgettable voice.